In this lesson, we're going to deepen our understanding of loops by making some changes to the loops program that we created earlier on. Now, the program that we created simply counted from 0 through 10, and with each iteration of the loop, it outputted the current value of counter, and the output was down here in the console. Now, what if we wanted to make our loop count rather than from 0, we wanted it to count from any other number above 0 or maybe even below 0. So all we need to do is to change this initial value. So if I change the initial value to say 5, now what will happen is my loop will count from 5 to 10. Right? Let's test that out. Now the thing with Java is, don't hesitate to try things out. Don't hesitate to experiment. There's nothing to lose if things don't work out. So there we have it. It's counting from 5 to 10. Very good. What if I wanted to start counting from a negative number? That's too possible. So I simply set my initial value to minus 10, and it will count up until 10. Alright, that compiles properly. Let's run it. And there we have it, negative 10 through positive 10. But what will happen if we choose a number that's higher than 10? And this is something we have to be very careful about, because a lot of people make this mistake and wonder why their loops are not working. So if I choose 20, alright, now is it going to count from 20 down to 10? No, it's not. What's going to happen here is, when counter's initial value is set to 20, because it's set to 20, when we encounter the while loop for the first time, it's going to check, is the value of counter less than or equal to 10? And in this case, 20 less than or equal to 10, false. Instantly, it will break the loop without having gone in there even once. So that will cause our loop to not run at all. So this is, we want to count 0, 2, 4, 6, etc. right up until 10. Now what we do is we look at the increment operator. We look at this guy. Now this guy is incrementing the value of counter by 1 each time that we encounter it. So each time we run through line 6, the value of counter is incremented by 1. What we need to do is to replace it with an operator that will increment the value of counter by 2. So we'll do this. Counter is equal to counter plus 2. Alright, now this line, what it's doing simply is, it's taking the existing value of counter and adding 2 to it and storing it back into counter. When we run this, we'll find that it's incrementing counter by 2 with each iteration of the loop. Let's compile it and run it. There we go, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Now in this way we can make our loop count in any increments that we want, 2s, 3s, 4s, 10s, hundreds, thousands, whichever increment we want. And we do that by incrementing this value by whatever we want it to count by. Now another question, what about counting backwards? Can we make a loop that counts backwards? That's also very possible. Now we set the initial, to set a value, a loop to count backwards, we set the initial value to the starting value, obviously. Let's say we wanted a loop that counts from 10 down to 0. So we start it off at 10, and then we set the final value to 0. But then we check here. We have to change the less than sign to greater than. So as long as there's a value here that that's counting from 10 down to 0, as long as the value is greater than 0, it will continue going through this loop. And the moment this value hits 0, it will stop immediately. Alright, and there's one other thing we need to do is change this to minus. Now if we leave this at 2, it's going to count from 10 back to 0 in increments of 2. And it has to be negative, because if we keep adding to the 10, then it's going to go upwards and the loop is never ever going to go to terminate. Let's test that out. Alright, and I've run it, and there we go. It's counted from 10 down to 0 in increments of -2. Now let's see what happens if I left this to +2. Alright, just to understand it, what we're going to do is we're going to first compile it and run it. This is going to create a scenario that we call an infinite loop. There we go. So this loop will never come to an end, and I'll explain to you why this is the case. Alright, so we need to click the end button to end this loop manually. Now the reason this loop is never ever going to end, sorry, it was plus. The reason this loop is never ever going to end is because it starts off at 10, and each time it's checking, is the value of this loop greater than or equal to 0? So 10 is greater than or equal to 0. It outputs the value of counter, then it increments the value to 12, and then it goes back. Is 12 greater than or equal to 10? Yes. Increment it to 14, and it'll continue that way. So there's nothing that's actually going to put an end to this loop. This loop is just going to continue over and over again forever until it is manually stopped. Now these are some of the things that you can do with loops, and it's important at this stage to go through your code and understand everything. Interfere and fidget with these values, with the 10, the less than, equal to, and understand what the value of each one is at every given stage and what each one is doing at every given stage, and understand if there are infinite loops, if there are errors, if the loop never runs. Try and understand why this is the case before you move on to other more advanced topics in Java.